What would a scholar give to see Sameisé in its old glory, when the great tales were written? A land that is now as much legend as it is history, a home of white towers with colorful ornaments at the great shore, a shelter in the great house from sadness in the east. The myths of the Sameisé, source of ancient wisdom and knowledge about long-forgotten traditions, tell of a flight from an old home to a safe refuge at the sea, in what is now known as the shore of Sameisé. Here the Samay found a secured position at the coast, but with little room for expansion. With no seafaring rival at the western shore of Menrine, the various competing Samay city-states moved on to conquer the seas, though not through force, for their ancestral crafts were trade and commerce. Samay culture resided in what they thought of as the three houses of life, built with three elements and sustained by three voyages, each ordered by magnitude. The three houses of life were, firstly and most importantly, the House of the Gods, a name the Samay had given to the world as home to all living beings. The second house was the city-state as the house of the community and protector of Samay culture, while the third was what they, as many other cultures, called the house of the family. An important question for a Samay to ask was, what house do I belong to? And while everyone had their place in the House of the Gods, a person's life would differ a great deal depending on which city and which family they belonged to. For these were ever in strife, each seeking to secure a fortunate position for their kin. This game of Samay society was played with figures made from three elements, each being the world of a distinct group of people. What we now associate most strongly with the old Sameisé are their seafaring merchants, inhabitants of the world of wood, from which they built their ships. And while their influence in Samay society grew over time until retired seafarers advanced to members of councils that ruled over the city-state, they were not part of the nobility that held power over the Samay in their early days. The defense and power over the city were the duty of a class of aristocratic warriors who traced their lineage back to a time when the Sameisé still lived under a single king, back in the east ere they fled the terror of the Achamirase. This ruling nobility was associated with the element of metal, which they used to forge spears and chariots. Both groups, merchants and warriors, were bound by steady negotiation, for the ships were owned by the city, and they sailed in union to ensure a safe passage over vast distances. Thus, each season, a council was summoned to decide where the merchant fleet was to be sent and who was to lead and partake. Over time, these councils grew more powerful until they held the reins in most city-states at last. The third element was that of stone, and I have difficulties understanding the intricacies it meant to Samay society. It is clear that it was of high importance to power, worth, and identity, but it seems that reality and appearance were strange siblings in this case. The reason is that stone was the element associated with the city's walls, temples, and homes. And these were associated with the matriarchs to watch over them and the servants to erect them. A common saying in old Samay epics is, "the house honors the ship," which also had to do with the myth all cities shared on the old Samay gods. While each city had different names for their gods and associated different things with them, in each case they believed in a single mother goddess who had a single son. They were connected in a story that saw the son lose his mother in the desert to finally witness her rebirth at the shore. A story that strikingly reminds of the Samay flight from the east. In line with this tale and the order of Samay society, female qualities were thought of as static, while male ones were of a dynamic nature. But while servitude and obedience were traits readily associated with the female element of stone, the true story seems more complex. The first reason is that the matriarchs to watch over a family's affairs and the city's temples were ever present and would not go on voyage, save for the founding of a new colony. Matriarchs would therefore hold the reins while their husbands and sons were at sea. Occasionally, a council had to be assembled in times of a patriarch's absence, and since formerly council positions were held by houses, not by individuals, the matriarchs were granted the right to speak in the patriarch's stead. Over time this was formally embraced, and I know of instances towards the end of the heroic age where city councils were led by matriarchs, making them rulers, much rather than servants. The second reason why I think there's more to the matriarch's true role than the tale of the Samay suggests is more difficult to explain, as it was tied to the Samay rituals of voyage, and they are at the heart of Samay society, fully understood by few, for the Samay were secretive about their true nature. Let me begin with how the Sameisé saw the idea of voyage. Voyage was what sustained the house, and to sustain the three houses, three different voyages were to be undertaken. The first and greatest voyage of all was life itself. A person was to live in a way that sustained the house of the gods and kept it in good state. The old Samay tales list a great deal of ideas on this, but these shall not be our concern now. A good voyage was, in a more literal sense, of greatest interest to the third house, the family. Coming home with riches earned from a good trade meant to sustain a good house. Sustaining a good house meant a prosperous and honored estate, which meant generous tax payment and good ties to other families, and that meant a place in the council, which again meant good prospects for marriage and future voyages. We must imagine the Samay idea of their city, the second house, as not too different from that. The city-state was an enterprise, a bank that invested in the proposals of different houses and harnessed their aspirations for the greater good. The second voyage, and likely the most important event in Samay society, was the founding of a new colony, a voyage of wood, metal and stone, an event compared to the birth of an individual sent by the gods into life. To secure the fortune of such an event, a grand festival was celebrated, which was also held for the seasonal departure and return of the trade ships, if in lesser magnitude. This festival was called terrabal, and its peak ceremony involved the city-state's Pelai, and if what I have gathered in information on it is true, it explains why there is merit to the belief that the matriarchs were of higher importance to a city's fortune than the accounts of the Samay suggest. During the terrabal, the seafarers to depart or return would make a symbolic journey through the city's temples, cheered on by large crowds. The leader of the expedition would be held in particular honor, and by the end of the ceremony, at the heart of the terrabal, the high priestesses, a group comprising the most influential matriarchs that had oversight over the temples, would grant him access to the city's Pelai. There he would unite with the spirits of all voyages before him, sensing their excitement, pride, and confidence, to lift his own spirit ere the party would set forth. When a fleet of ships later returned from its voyage, the expedition leader would again be summoned before the high priestesses. He would give an account of weal and woe suffered and great deeds performed during the expedition. The high priestesses were tasked with writing a poetic account of these tales, which I believe fell to them since in the early days there was no paper, and the events would be recorded in the form of wall carvings and paintings, a custom the Sameisé retained till their fall. Thus the great heroes of the Sameisé would be recorded in a hierarchy of stone temples and palaces, making the city itself a testament to the adventures of her children, and the ones honored in these works of art and stories would be revered by their allies and begrudged by their foes. Stories were power to the Samay, and they were aware of this, for they took care not to include the Achamidase, whom they loathed above all, in their accounts, condemning them to be lost and forgotten in the mist of time. What matters is that these tales were written by women to praise and honor the deeds and virtues of men, yes, but we must understand that behind the courtesy and devotion, a sharp mind and will may have shaped success and failure in a complex social game. Telling a story to the Samay was undoubtedly a political affair that determined how to reward voyages with stories, granting the political capital for the next round of negotiations, thereby covertly navigating interests and risks of the higher good. The terrabal was meant to display the virtues of men, but in truth it may have been guided by those of women, to which the wit and profundity of the old Samay epics undoubtedly attest. Be that as it may, for a Samayo joining a voyage was a rite of passage, so it was spoken of a man-making journey for those sons partaking for the first time, and in each season one of them was chosen by the high priestesses during the terrabal as a symbol for the city's healthy future. With the return of each fleet, a fear spread within the city that none of them would return, heralding an ill fate. Yet all the higher the spirits would be had one of them proven decisively, through courage, diplomacy or cunning, to be a worthy heir to the city's future. In any case, it was common for the homecomers to be married upon return as part of the terrabal, and one of them would be awarded with the highest honor the city had to offer, next to leading an expedition. This honor consisted in performing the marriage with his bride in a ceremony led by a high priestess, where they would interact with the city's Pelai. The Sameisé kept the specifics a well-guarded secret, but rumor said that, as the purpose of the ritual was to celebrate a healthy future for the community, the ceremony involved a ritual act of procreation. I know not what is true, but it is a fact that the Bachai and others were estranged and appalled by this custom, and they would deride the Sameisé for it. A common joke at the time centered around the fact that it was conceivable for an expedition leader to witness the moment of his own conception. But to make sense of the terrabal, we have to make ourselves aware what impressions were stored in a Samay Pelai. For the ones to interact with it were the most cherished children of a city, in what the Sameisé must have imagined to be the prime moments in their lives, and the high priestesses, wisest of all, in the moment of their greatest power. It took courage for the Sameisé to venture out into far lands over long distances, with great risk to men and ship, and it was in the terrabal that they harnessed all the confidence and gratitude their community could muster, the highest fulfillment of their way of life. While at home, the priestess's praise in stories was a Voyage's most precious resource to secure the success of his house, elsewhere it was the goodwill of foreign rulers. For the Samay rarely chose to take up arms against other people and preferred to trade with them for mutual benefit. For this reason, the Samay list of virtues includes not only courage and prowess, but also pragmatism, cultural understanding, prudence, and resourcefulness. On each voyage, the Samay would take a stone trove made from stone of the city wall, thus sharing the house and opening the wall to others. The greatest honor the Samay could offer was to be recorded in their stories and buildings, however, an honor reserved for great heroes the Samay admired or foreign rulers with whom they sought a good standing. Going elsewhere was exciting for the Samay, as they could break free from the rules of the rigid game for success and recognition they faced at home. For the Sameisé, life lived as a great voyage kept the world alive. Not only one's own house and that of the city, but through trade and friendship, even strangers prospered from a good voyage. This may have been a story the Samay told themselves to justify their expansion into many corners of the world, but it must not be forgotten that through their eyes we first learned to look with a reflected view on other cultures, as seen through our own eyes. And it was the Sameisé who first thought of life as a great story, as a voyage between home and the world that could be written down and remembered. It is no wonder we inherited such a wealth of tales from the Sameisé, for they knew well about the power of the word.